This is the story and events during 1918, in Knox County, Indiana, during the time of the world pandemic. Called the Spanish Flu, or Flu of 1918. All information has been taken from newspapers, photographs found on Google were used. This was very sad times in the lives of the people from here, whole families wiped out, loved ones lost. The local leaders were doing the best they could for the times. This is the third installment, a link to the others are in the information below, and at the end of this video. This video takes place between December 1918 and January 1919. Thank you for watching.
In bustling cities and remote villages, in the United States and around the world, orphan children cried for their parents in 1918. People of all cultures struggled with the same terrible threat. And within a matter of months, as many as 50 million would be dead. In the United States, the death toll reached 675,000, 5 times the number of U.S. soldiers killed in World War I. What was that deadly threat?
December 4, 1918. In the Vincennes commercial on page 2, nurse is improving, Miss Leona Shaden, a nurse who left Vincennes a short time ago to complete her training in the Indianapolis City Hospital, is home to recuperate. Miss Shaden had been working among the influenza patients for several weeks, when she contracted the disease, which was followed by pneumonia. Although she is not able to be out, her many friends wish for her a speedy recovery. Joseph Huber, of the firm of Huber Brothers Grocers, of North Vincennes, is seriously ill with influenza pneumonia, and has been taken to the emergency hospital. His wife Mrs. Joseph Huber, and 3 children are also very ill with influenza. Wednesday, December 4, 1918. On page 4 of the Vincennes commercial. No signs of improvement, the headlines read. In local influenza situation, a number of additional new cases being reported to Health Board Tuesday. There are no signs of material improvement in the influenza situation in Vincennes. A number of new cases were reported to Secretary of the Board of Health on Tuesday, and several additional homes were posted by the police with influenza placards. While no deaths were reported from the influenza Tuesday, reports from the emergency hospital, and from a number of homes were to the effect that several patients are in critical condition suffering with complicated pneumonia. Reported warnings are issued to persons suffering from influenza, and mild form, that they must remain off the street, and indoors. By going out of doors, they not only endanger their lives by taking cold, and developing pneumonia, but spread the germs broadcast, and by doing so may be responsible for the illness, and possible the death of other persons. There are no prospects for the immediate lifting of the influenza ban, and unless the situation soon shows some sign of improving, more drastic steps are being considered to check and wipe out the epidemic. December 5, 1918. On page 5 of the commercial, it was reported popular young grocer dead. Joseph A. Huber passed away Wednesday morning at the emergency hospital of pneumonia. Joseph A. Huber, a member of the firm of Huber Brothers Grocers, North 2nd and St. Clair Streets, passed away Wednesday morning at the emergency hospital at 9:15 a.m. Pneumonia, following an attack of influenza, was the cause of his death. Funeral services will be conducted from his residence, 1012 East Sycamore Street. Thursday afternoon at 2:30 p.m. Reverend Father officiating. Burial will be made in the Mount Calvary Cemetery. The deceased, with other members of his family, had been suffering from influenza and pneumonia. His condition became so critical that he was removed to the emergency hospital, but there was no chance for his recovery, and he passed away Wednesday morning. He is survived by a widow and 4 children, Vivian aged 7, May Francis aged 5, Catherine aged 3, and Betty Lou aged 2 months, also his mother Mrs. Gertrude Huber, 3 brothers, Albert and George of this city, and Alvis, of Los Angeles, California, 3 sisters, Mrs. Joseph Mallet, and Mrs. Marie, and Gertrude Huber. Deceased was born August 2, 1892, and was aged 26 years 4 months, and 2 days at the time of his death. In the obituaries in the commercial on December 5, 1918, Mrs. Ruth Combs, wife of Walter Combs, passed away Wednesday morning at 5 a.m. at the family residence 312 West St. Clair Street. Influenza pneumonia was the cause of her death. Funeral services will be conducted from the residence Friday morning at 9:30 a.m. Interment in Mount Zion Cemetery. Mrs. Lewis Piper, aged 22 years, passed away Tuesday night at midnight at the family home a short distance north of Bicknell. Influenza was the cause of death. She is survived by a husband and 2 small children. Funeral services will be held Thursday afternoon. Helen Ridgway, 4-year-old daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Wade Ridgway, died Wednesday at the home of her parents in Aliceville of influenza. Funeral services will be held Thursday afternoon. From the home, interment in the IOOF Cemetery. December 6, 1918 on page 1 in the Vincennes commercial. Mayor McDowell removes ban on picture shows and churches. City head overrides health board secretary, and orders ban removed from theaters and churches beginning Sunday, promising to enforce quarantine regulations. Dr. Held, Secretary of Board of Health, announces that unless order is rescinded he will resign. Unless the order issued by Mayor McDowell, following a meeting with the merchants Thursday evening, is rescinded, the ban, which has been in effect on the moving picture theaters and the churches for the past 2 weeks, will be removed, and unless the order is rescinded, Dr. H.W. Held, Secretary of Board, today. Dr. Held has authorized the statement that he will refuse to serve longer as head of Board of Health, unless the restrictions that have been in force for the past 2 weeks are continued, until the influenza situation in Vincennes has improved to such an extent that the ban can be removed without endangering the health of the public. The meetings of the merchants was called by Mayor McDowell, for the purpose of devising some plan for checking the continued spread of the epidemic in the city. Mayor McDowell expressed his belief that if all the stores would close for 1 week, he was positive that the situation would clear to such an extent that the ban could be removed, and remain lifted, the balance of the winter. The merchants, not all, but the majority of them, objected to this plan, voicing their belief that the more sensible plan to be adopted was to place a rigid quarantine on all homes where persons are suffering from influenza, and keep the entire family under quarantine until there could be no possible danger of the members of the family spreading the disease. Mayor McDowell explained the difficulty of enforcing such a quarantine, contending that the disease is infectious and not contagious, and that a person not suffering from the disease could not carry it to another person. He has explained that in many cases, where families are quarantined, and the head of the family deprived of the means of making a living for his family, it would be necessary for the city to provide for such cases. Dr. Held was called upon to express his opinion in the matter, and stated that he was convinced that a continuance of the present restrictions would soon result in the epidemic being checked, and situation improve in a short time. He declared that nothing could be accomplished in his opinion, in closing all the stores 1 week, and the completely lift of the ban, stating that the period of closing would not be time enough to determine whether any benefits were obtained, and that by completely lifting the ban at the expiration of the week, would be to invite a fresh outbreak of the situation. Dr. Held suggested that the mayor select some person whose duty it would be to secure from physicians from day to day the names and addresses of the new cases, and place influenza cards on these homes. The duty of such a person would be to see that the quarantine regulations are rigidly enforced. Mayor McDowell, realizing the opposition of the merchants to his plan for closing the stores for a week, declared that it was his intention to play square with everybody in the matter, and in order to play square, he would order the ban removed from the moving picture theaters and the churches, leaving the matter of reopening the schools up to the school superintendent. He informed Dr. Held that he would assume responsibility for the consequences. Following the meeting, Dr. Held voiced his displeasure of the action of Mayor McDowell, declaring the mayor had overridden him as head of the Board of Health. He added that in his opinion the ban which has been in force has resulted in holding in check the situation, and that had the ban been continued for a couple more weeks that it could have been safely removed. The merchants by their actions this afternoon, Dr. Held declared, demonstrated the fact that they are more concerned in the business than they are in the lives of the people of the community. I was not in favor of closing all business houses for 1 week, believing that no appreciable good could come from such a step, but the merchants represented at the meeting displayed selfishness in the matter, and but little concern for the lives of the people of Vincennes. As health officer, I have exerted every energy in my efforts to stamp out the epidemic, and am positive we are making headway, and we're getting the situation under control. I dread to think of the consequences of lifting the bans, and unless Mayor McDowell rescinds his order, I will tender him my resignation as Secretary of the Board of Health Friday. It is my intention of communicating with Dr. Hurdy, Friday mornings, and trust that some good will come from this conference. Mayor McDowell declared that although the ban is lifted permitting the reopening of the churches, and moving picture theaters Sunday, the restrictions on the people just as rigid as while the ban was on, and the persons suffering from influenza must remain at home. While the churches are moving, picture shows will be permitted to reopen. Persons who fear coming in contact with influenza by attending either churches or attending the shows should remain at home. I believe the citizens will realize the responsibility placed upon them, and that they will not attend either the churches or the shows if they are suffering from the disease. Speaking of the quarantine, Mayor McDowell declared, the quarantine regulations will be strictly enforced, and every person in every family where the influenza is in the homes, must remain at home until quarantine is lifted. No exceptions will be made to this rule. According to Dr. Held, there is a slight decrease in the number of new cases reported Thursday, but all of the physicians had not made reports. The encouraging feature of the situation, according to Dr. Held, is the fact that the majority of the new cases are of milder form than some of the earlier cases, which gives rise to the hope that the seriousness, and that in a short time the danger would be past, providing the proper precautions are taken. J.W. Foreman, superintendent of the city schools, although confined to his home with the influenza, gave out the statement to the commercial over the telephone last night, that none of the schools in the city will be open until there is no longer any danger from the influenza. He ventured no date for the probable reopening of the schools. On page 3 of the Western Sun, on December 6, 1918. Conditions are still alarming. Physicians are in a quandary to know just what to do with the situation in the city. Dozen new cases are reported today. Number of physicians reporting Tuesday evening state that conditions are not improving. This is the outstanding feature of the report from the City Board of Health today, made this afternoon by Dr. H.W. Held, on his daily summary of the influenza conditions made to the Sun. With a dozen new families reported as having the malady, the board said that there was no improvement in the conditions, and that with that he was unable to give any encouragement for abatement of the ban at this time. On the other hand, there is a distinct air of clamping the ban on tighter, which, if give little impetus with any concerted number of deaths at any time, would mean that the entire business of the city would be closed up for a week, or more. Dr. Held stated that in consultation with a number of the city physicians Tuesday evening, that general reports were that there was no let-up, and that new families are being reported daily. The influenza hospital is crowded, and conditions in some homes are extremely critical, with all members of the family down, and the sick simply helping the sick in the best way possible. Only developments can determine what will be done in Vincennes, was the way the board intimated this afternoon. Friday, December 6, 1918, in the Vincennes commercial on page 5, is spreading at Oaktown. One death has occurred this week from influenza, and the epidemic is rapidly spreading there. The influenza is rapidly spreading here. Several new cases have been reported here this week, and one death has occurred. The schools were opened last Monday, but will probably be closed again if the situation does not show a change for the better. Lemuel Conrad, aged 19, was a victim to the fatal disease, passing away at his grandfather's home, J.L. Sullivan, at 2 p.m. Tuesday. He was slightly recovering from the illness when he came to his grandfather's on November 27, from his home in Illinois. He immediately became worse, and died 6 hours later. He is survived by his parents, one brother, and two sisters. Funeral services will be conducted, from the residence Friday, interment in the Oaktown Cemetery. Cora S. Petz Mulheron, aged 23 years, wife of Michael Mulheron, dies Wednesday night at 10:30 p.m., at the family residence, 834 Emerson Avenue. Influenza was the cause of her death. She is survived by her husband, and 2 children, father, mother, and 5 brothers: Harry Lewis, Homer, John, and Robert Petz, and 2 sisters, Rachel and Ruth Petz. Funeral services will be conducted from the family residence Friday morning at 10 a.m. Reverend L.C. Bentley officiating, interment in the city cemetery. Entire family has influenza. The entire family of J.W. Foreman, City Superintendent of Schools, has the influenza. Mr. Foreman was the first victim of the epidemic, and his children later became ill. Thursday evening Mrs. Foreman became ill, and the physician attending the family announced that she was suffering from the malady. Mr. Foreman is somewhat improved, but will be confined to his home for several days. December 7, 1918, in the Vincennes commercial on page 1. Selection of new Secretary of Board of Health announced. Following the resignation of Dr. Held, Mayor McDowell offers the secretaryship to Dr. Charles E. Stone. No new regulations issued Friday. As the situation now stands, the stores are open, and the theaters, churches, and schools may be open when those in charge so desire, to enforce quarantine. Dr. Charles E. Stone, ex-captain in the Medical Reserve Corps, will receive official notice today that he has been appointed Secretary of the City Board of Health. To succeed Dr. H. W. Held, resigned. Dr. Stone has expressed his willingness to assume the responsibility of the office. Dr. Held sent in his resignation to Mayor McDowell Friday morning, fulfilling his promise to take this action in case the change in the order for lifting ban on moving picture theaters and churches was not rescinded. To the commercial, Dr. Held stated last night that he had served as secretary against his wishes, and at great sacrifice, but feeling it his duty to accept the responsibility of the office until return from the service of Dr. N. E. Beckus. However, he stated since the authority for enforcing the closing order on the churches and the theaters was taken from his hands, he felt that his services were no longer needed, and he realized that the time to resign from the office which he did not desire was opportune. Reiterates his statements. I do not desire to enter any controversy in the matter, Dr. Held stated, neither have I any bitter feelings for anybody, but I believe that the regulations we had in force for the past 2 weeks, was gradually checking the influenza epidemic in Vincennes, and when the ban on the churches and theaters was lifted last night, I felt that my judgment and efforts to care for the situation was destructed, and that the work I had performed was being undone. I authorized the statement in the commercial Friday morning, and have not changed my opinion, and believe in the least. My thoughts first, last, and all the time it so looked after the welfare of the people in the city, and I have worked day and night, losing sleep, in an endeavor to reduce the majority from the influenza to the greatest possible extent. I hope that no anger will ensue from the present plan to control the situation, but I am not in accord with the plan, believing as I do that the danger of the epidemic spreading is greater in large crowds than where the size of the crowd is limited. Cards were placed on all businesses, houses Friday afternoon informing persons who have members of the family ill with influenza that they are not invited to the stores. It is hoped that these cards will have the desired result, and that the influenza will not be contracted by any persons entering the stores. To enforce quarantine, it is the plan of Mayor McDowell to enforce a rigid quarantine on all families where any member in the family is suffering from influenza. An officer will be selected whose duty it will be to call upon all physicians each day, and obtain a list of new cases. The homes where influenza makes its appearance will be placarded, and strict quarantine established. The warning is made that persons who have fear of becoming infected with influenza by visiting shows or churches, or any other public places, or meetings should remain away from these places. Every citizen is expected in a measure the guardian of his, or her own health, and will be responsible should they contract influenza, by visiting any public place where a crowd is congregated. No new orders issued. Contrary to statements made in the afternoon papers, no changes were made Friday in the flu ban regulations decided upon at the meeting held Thursday afternoon, and as announced in the commercial Friday morning. The business houses of the city are open as usual to those who desire to do their trading. The ban, which has been on the theater and churches for the past 2 weeks, has been lifted. Theater managers who desire to open their places of business can do so, and services can be held in the churches if it is so desired by the pastors. The ban has also been raised on the schools and public library. But those in charge, it is understood, are not disposed just at this time to open those institutions. As for the actual flu situation, there is no apparent change, and it is up to the individual to take every precaution necessary to prevent their becoming infected, and in the event they do become infected, it is their duty to remain at home, and prevent the spreading of the disease to others. According to the order given by Mayor McDowell, the matter of reopening of places which had been affected by the ban is optional to the heads of the organizations concerned. In the case of the schools, announcement is made that none of the schools, public or parochial, will be opened until the situation warrants such action being taken. In the matter of reopening the public library, no decision has yet been announced by Miss Ella Davison, librarian. Mayor McDowell emphasized the fact that the rule in regard to advertising special sales, or anything to increase the size of crowds, will be a violation of the health orders. Although the city was without a Board of Health secretary Friday, indications based upon reports from various sources were to the effect that there is but little change, if any, in the local situation. December 8, 1918, on page 4 of the Vincennes commercial. New secretary enters duties. Dr. Stone takes reins in influenza situation in Vincennes, quarantine officer is appointed. Dr. Charles E. Stone, newly appointed secretary of the City Board of Health, has entered upon his new duties, and taken the reins in the effort to drive from the city the influenza epidemic which has held sway here for the past 2 or 3 weeks. He will be assisted in his work by Samuel Byers, who was appointed Saturday as quarantine officer. It will be Mr. Byers' duty to enforce a rigid quarantine in all homes in the city where cases of influenza are reported to the new health secretary. The new officials enter upon their new duties confronted with a situation which they report is not in the least improved. Numerous new cases of influenza were reported to Dr. Stone Saturday, and he announces that many of these new cases are in new homes. Mr. Byers today will receive from Dr. Stone the names and addresses of all persons suffering from the influenza, and homes where members are suffering from the disease, which are not already posted, will placarded, and a rigid quarantine established. In speaking of the situation last night to the commercial representative, Dr. Stone declared, "The situation is not improved. There have been a large number of new cases reported today, and many of these are reported from homes which had escaped the disease. While the situation is serious, I believe that with the new methods adapted for combating the epidemic, we will soon be able to control the situation, and eventually wipe it out of the city. I believe firmly that we are now on the right track towards successfully handling the situation. We will quarantine all cases, making it impossible for persons suffering from the influenza to infect others with the disease germs. Visiting in these homes will be prohibited, and no members of the families will be permitted to leave the homes. The same rigid quarantine will apply at the emergency hospital, with the exception of where persons are dying. In such cases, members of the family will be permitted to visit their relatives at the hospital. All of the churches of the city will be thrown open to their congregations today, and all persons in good health, who are not under quarantine, will be permitted to attend the services. The moving picture theaters will also be opened, and the various playhouses have announced their programs for the day. The customary precautions will be enforced, and no persons admitted to either churches or picture shows with any symptoms of colds or influenza. It is trusted that with these precautions, and with the quarantine which will be enforced today, that no danger will result from the opening of these public places. Tuesday, December 10, 1918. On page 4 of the Vincennes commercial. Newton Welton, living 1/2 mile south of Verne, on the Monroe City Road, passed away Saturday night at midnight. Death was due to influenza pneumonia. Funeral services were held Monday morning. Roy Ballard, after a brief illness of influenza and pneumonia, passed away Monday afternoon at the emergency hospital. He is survived by a widow and several children. The deceased was a brother of William Ballard, who lost a wife and 2 children from pneumonia during the present epidemic of influenza. Funeral arrangements will be announced later.
Also on page 4 of the City paper, December 10, 1918. Urges citizens to cooperate. Secretary of Health Board urges all persons feeling ill to remain at home and away from crowds. The headlines read, "Citizens are urged to cooperate with the City Board of Health in the fight to wipe out the influenza epidemic in the city." The epidemic cannot be wiped out as long as persons suffering from the disease in a mild form, or slightly ill in the first stages of the malady, mingling with crowds on the street, visiting stores, or other public places. If you feel in the least bit ill, and are not sure what your ailment is, stay at home, was the edict issued last night by Dr. C.E. Stone, Secretary of the Board of Health. The epidemic is not spread by persons who are so ill that they are compelled to go to bed and remain at home, but from cases of walking influenza, mild cases which do not make patients sufficiently ill to confine them to their homes. There was a slight improvement indicating by Monday's report of new influenza cases over the number of cases reported Sunday. On Sunday 25 new cases were reported to the Board of Health, while Monday only 16 new cases were reported. However, one physician who stated he had a great number of new cases on Monday than any other previous day, was unable to make out his report Monday evening on account of being so busy attending his patients. When his report is turned in, there may be a number of additional cases to Monday's report. According to Dr. Stone, many of the new cases Monday morning were more serious than the cases reported last week. Several of the old cases have developed pneumonia, and further loss of life is feared. The extreme weather conditions are believed partly responsible for the increase in the number of new cases of influenza during the past 2 days. December 13, 1918, in the Vincennes commercial, Stella Mae Wells, wife of Paul Wells, passed away Tuesday night at 11:45 p.m. Influenza was the cause of her death. She was aged 25 years, 8 months, and 5 days. Funeral services will be conducted from the residence, number 6 Real Avenue, Thursday afternoon at 1 p.m. Interment in the city cemetery. Mrs. L. M. Dixon, of 406 Harrison Street, passed away at 8:30 am this morning, death due to influenza. No arrangements have been made for funeral. Friday, December 13, 1918. Influenza situation shows practically no improvement, according to reports from physicians and health authorities. The influenza situation in Vincennes shows practically no improvement according to reports from the health authorities. While the number of patients being treated at the emergency hospital has been reduced to 11, several deaths have occurred in various parts of the city during the day, and physicians have been called upon to attend new cases. Dr. C.E. Stone, Secretary of the Board of Health, reports that the situation has not developed sufficient signs of improvement, but that the people must be on their guard. Samuel Byers, quarantine officer, reported that only 3 new cases had been reported to him during the day, and 3 homes placed under quarantine. However, an investigation conducted by the commercial discloses the fact that new cases are showing up over the city. 7 physicians out of probably 15 practicing physicians in Vincennes reported 34 new cases of influenza in the city Thursday night, the greatest number of new cases by far of any day since the epidemic first made its appearance here. 3 physicians reported no new cases during the day, and it was impossible to get in touch with the other physicians. Practically of all physicians consulted, agreed on one thing, that the situation in Vincennes is becoming critical, and that the number of deaths, and the cases which have developed pneumonia from which there is no chance to recover, is appalling. To the commercial, 1 physician reported 15 new cases, another reported 9 additional cases, many in new families. The reports from the other physicians showed that 1 had attended 3 new cases, 3 report 2 cases each, and one makes a report of only one new case. The increase in the number of patients developing pneumonia is the thing causing the concern of the physicians interviewed. Despite the best of care in the treatment of these patients, many have died, and the deaths of others are feared. The physicians are making a heroic effort to wipe out the epidemic, and hold down the heavy mortalities. These men have been working day and night, practically without rest, and with but little sleep, visiting patients and rendering medical assistance. The situation has reached such a stage that some of the physicians are unable to handle additional cases. On page 5 of the Vincennes commercial, on December 13, 1918. The headlines read, 43 persons is November toll of influenza in Knox County according to the figures of the State Board of Health. 11 died during October. 43 persons in Knox County died from the flu during the month of November according to the records of the State Board of Health made public today. This is in comparison with 11 who died during October. 11 other counties lost more than did Knox, and among these 11 were Sullivan County with 66 deaths, and Greene County with 69. Influenza pneumonia during November, the second month of the epidemic, caused the deaths of 2,521 Hoosiers according to official reports compiled by the State Board of Health. During October there were 3,291 victims in Indiana, or 770 more than last month. The total number of deaths caused directly by the disease up to December 1 is 5,792. Herschel M. Wright, registered statistician of the board, said that the November figures are complete with the exception of a few scattering communities which have not reported. When all these reports are received, it is estimated that it will not increase the November deaths more than 100. The normal influenza pneumonia death rate for November is about 230. Indianapolis had 124 fewer deaths from the malady last month than in October, reporting 306 against a total of 430 during the first month of the epidemic. A table prepared by the state board showing the number of deaths in the 10 large cities of the state indicated that there was an increase in fatalities in only 3 of the cities. The table follows. Indianapolis October 430, November 306 deaths, Evansville October 117, November 100 deaths, Fort Wayne October 26, November 24 deaths, Terre Haute October 47, November 105 deaths, South Bend October 147, November 98 deaths, Gary October 110, November 146 deaths, East Chicago October 165, November 36 deaths, Hammond October 139, November 53 deaths, Muncie October 9, November 7 deaths, Richmond October 26, November 33 deaths. Deaths from the influenza reported on Friday, December 13, 1918, Gussie Thompson, aged 27 years, wife of Fred Thompson of 1137 Bunton Street, passed away Saturday evening. Death was due to an attack of influenza. Funeral services will be conducted Monday afternoon at 2:30 p.m. from Gardner's Chapel. Mike Cotugno, aged 26 years, passed away at 7:30 p.m. Sunday evening. Influenza was the cause of death. Deceased was born in Italy, and was a stonecutter for Otto Brock. He is survived by one brother, Angelo Cotugno, of 510 Hickman Street. Funeral services will take place at 10 a.m. Tuesday morning from Gardner's Chapel. Interment in City Cemetery. November 14, 1918, schools to remain closed. The city schools will not open on Monday morning as had been previously announced, but will remain closed until after the holidays, according to the statement authorized last night by J.W. Foreman, City Superintendent of Schools. We desire to be on the safe side in the matter, Mr. Foreman declared, and owing to the present situation after consulting with members of the school board, decided to postpone the opening of the schools until after the holidays. The Teachers Institute, however, will be held today in the junior high school. There is no ban on public meetings, and Mr. Foreman expressed his confidence that no teacher in the city suffering from the influenza, or with the disease in the family, would think of attending the institute. John Lang, aged 29 years, died at 12:40 a.m. this Saturday morning at his home of Oster Joyce, 1025 North 4th Street, where he had been making his home. Death was due to influenza and pneumonia. The deceased is survived by 3 children, who are making their home with his father-in-law, Mike Fries, on East Main Street, Mr. Lang's wife having died several years ago. Arrangements for the funeral will be announced later. The entire family of John Purcell, with the exception of Mr. Purcell living on rural route number 8, is suffering with influenza. Frederick Philip Wise, aged 50 years, passed away at his home 922 North 12th Street Saturday about noon, after a brief illness of influenza. He is survived by his widow, and 1 son, Howard Wise. Deceased was formerly a member of the police force, and prior to that time was a well-known barber. Until his recent illness he was employed at the Indian Creek coal mine. He was a member of the Knights of Pythias Lodge. Funeral services will be conducted from the residence Monday afternoon at 2 p.m., Reverend Kelso officiating. Interment in the city cemetery. On December 15, 1918, on page 5, it read, "Fewer cases are reported. Slight improvement in influenza situation is indicated by reports of physicians Saturday night. 23 new cases are reported, as against 34 cases Friday evening. However, 2 physicians who have been included in previous reports, failed to report Saturday night. The new cases reported last night included new cases in old homes where there has been no previous appearance of the disease. Dr. J.W. Held reported 1 new case, Dr. C.E. Stewart 10 new cases, 4 in new homes, 6 in old or carted homes, Dr. Smaddle 6 in old carted homes, Dr. Prather refused to make report, Dr. Jones no new cases, Dr. McCowan no new cases, Dr. Anderson no report, Dr. Carson 4 new cases, Dr. Peard no new cases, Dr. Frigg no report, Dr. Kelso 4 new cases, Dr. Bauer no new cases, Dr. Phillip no report, Dr. Von Tress 4 new cases log rip, Dr. Pilemeyer no new cases, Dr. Ramsey no new cases in the city, a few in the country, Dr. Frank no report, Dr. Stone no new cases. According to several physicians, a number of the influenza cases have developed pneumonia, and several cases are reported critical. A few of the physicians reported their belief that the situation is showing some improvements, but warned the public against becoming too optimistic, as a greater outbreak of the epidemic may appear within the next 24 hours. Other physicians were firm in their belief that the situation is not improved in the least, but that it is continually spreading, and warn the citizens to be on their guard, and avoid coming in contact with any person suffering from the influenza in a mild form. According to the physicians, there are many persons suffering from the disease in mild form, who have not called physicians. The danger of the epidemic spreading from this source is great, and these persons are warned against appearing on the street. Dr. C.E. Stone, Secretary of the City Board of Health, announced last 6 new cases, in new families, had been reported to him by the physicians. Dr. Jones stated that it is his opinion that the situation is showing some signs of improving. December 17, 1918, on page 4 of the Vincennes commercial. 4 deaths in neighborhood, fatal influenza epidemic in neighborhood of Orville in south part of county exacts heavy toll. Decker on December 16, 4 deaths in the past 3 days, is the heavy toll exacted by the influenza in the Orville neighborhood in the south part of the county, a short distance south of Mount Carmel. The deaths were all in the same neighborhood, and funeral of all the victims were held Sunday. Ben Hardy, aged 60, whose death resulted from influenza pneumonia, was buried Sunday. Mrs. Ellen Peach, aged 28 years, who died Friday of influenza pneumonia, was buried Sunday. She is survived by a husband, and 4 children. The family resided in the Dark Bend neighborhood. A 4-year-old son, who died on the same day that the death of his mother occurred, was also buried Sunday. Mrs. Elmer Dodds, sister-in-law of Mrs. Ella Peach, whose home is in Illinois, died Friday of influenza, and was buried Sunday. She is survived by a husband. Also on December 17, 1918. In the Vincennes commercial. Flu situation in Decker. The influenza situation here, while the cases are mild in nature, is alarming. There is the greatest number of victims of the epidemic at one time since the disease first appeared here. Of the 56 students in the school, 26 are ill with the disease. The Decker schools, which opened this morning, after having been closed for 1 week, on account of the flu, were closed again this evening, on account of the local situation. Nearly half the students are suffering with the disease. Wednesday, December 18, 1918. The headlines read, "To take charge of the situation, Captain N.E. Beckus, Secretary of the Board of Health, arrived from Camp Taylor Tuesday night." The story read like this. Captain N.E. Beckus, local Secretary of the Board of Health, who was granted a leave of absence several weeks ago, to enter the service, has returned home from Camp Taylor, where he has been in the base hospital combating the influenza epidemic, in the Army camp. Returning home last night, to take charge of the local situation. Captain Beckus has just recovered from a severe attack of the influenza, and announced upon arrival in the city last night, that he knows how it goes to suffer from the malady. The influenza situation in the camps, and among civilians, is a serious matter, and one which must be combated by every person. The death rate in Vincennes has been startling, Captain Beckus declared, and the situation here is such that everybody must work together. Forgetting politics, personalities all working together with one end in view, and that end to wipe out the epidemic, and save lives. It is not a situation to belittle. I had charge of one of the observation wards in the base hospital at Camp Taylor, and have seen the epidemic in all its stages. It is something serious, and my views on the matter have undergone a complete change. Captain Beckus, immediately after arriving in the city, called the commercial by telephone to learn the influenza situation yesterday. He was informed that conditions were showing considerable improvement, so far as new cases are concerned, but that the death rate still continues heavy. He requested that the commercial cooperate with him in the fight to stamp out the epidemic in Vincennes. Jessie E. Erdem, aged 24 years, living 3 miles south of Bicknell, passed away Sunday morning at home of her parents. Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Hullen at 4:30 a.m., North 15 New Albany Avenue. Influenza pneumonia was the cause of her death. Besides her husband, deceased is survived by a father and mother, 2 small children, a boy and a girl, 4 sisters, and 1 brother. Funeral services will be conducted from the home Thursday morning at 10 a.m., Reverend Cooper officiating, interment in the city cemetery. Miss Florence Yoakum, who has been seriously ill with influenza at her home on North 2nd Street, is able to be out again. Card of thanks. I desire to express the thanks of the Red Cross, to the people of Vincennes, for their wholehearted cooperation shown during the present influenza epidemic, which has exacted such a heavy toll of sickness and deaths. The citizens have responded nobly to the appeal for broth and provisions for the suffering, and in every way have shown a wonderful spirit, especially towards the patients in the emergency hospital. Page 4 of the Vincennes commercial on Thursday, December 19, 1918, has returned from camp. Captain C. L. Boyd, after month in medical service, has returned home to resume practice here. The story goes like this. Captain C. L. Boyd, who has been stationed at Camp Greenleaf, Chickamauga Park, Georgia for the past month, has received his honorable discharge from the service, and has returned home to assist in the work of stamping out the influenza epidemic, and also to resume his regular practice here. Captain Boyd announced last night that he had not been aware of the seriousness of the situation here, last week until he arrived home. However, he expressed the belief that from present reports the situation is showing considerable signs of improving. An interesting story on page 4 of the Vincennes commercial on Thursday, December 19, 1918. Bottled soft drinks preventative of influenza. An exchange says, it has been pointed out by many prominent physicians that stringent and restricted use of sugar is one of the reasons that the Spanish influenza gained such a headway throughout the country, it being recalled also that in the terrible grippe epidemic of 1890, sugar had been used sparingly owing to high prices. Sugar having such a high percentage of easily assimilated carbohydrates, its energy-producing power helps the body to throw off and resist germs. Most prominent physicians recognize this fact, and many have recommended the drinking of bottled soft drinks, such as ginger ale, in the way of giving nourishment and strength to the body, through carbonated liquids, and when the patient is too sick to partake of solid food. At a recent bottlers' meeting held in Boston, the reporter made inquiry of several of the prominent bottlers of the soft drink beverages as to whether or not they had delivered any goods under doctor's prescription to the hospitals, and was surprised at the many instances where doctors not only recommend it, but where nurses were ordering it by the case. Charles L. Kuhn has the flu, foreman of the mechanical department of the commercial, is confined to his home suffering from an attack of the influenza. Although his physician announces that he is a pretty sick man, he states that his condition is not serious. Wednesday morning Mrs. Kuhn also became ill, and the attending physician announced that she too was suffering from an attack of influenza. Joseph Hambley, 14-year-old son of Mr. and Mrs. J. D. Hambley, 1608 Fairground Avenue, is critically ill with pneumonia, which has developed from an attack of influenza. December 20, 1918 it was reported in the commercial, improvement still continues, influenza situation now better than at any time since outbreak of epidemic, according to Health Board. The influenza epidemic conditions according to statement last night by Dr. C. E. Stone, Secretary of the Board of Health. The number of new cases are becoming fewer each day, and unless a fresh outbreak comes in the next few days, things will become practically normal again. December 21, 1918, Mrs. Otto Terry, living at 518 Nicholas Street, is reported critically ill with influenza. She has been ill for several days. Page 4 of the Vincennes commercial, December 21, 1918, suffering with influenza, Walter White, 2 children, and mother-in-law, living on Parkinson Street, are suffering from influenza. Their condition is reported as serious, but the family is being cared for by nurses sent out by the Red Cross. John Gartner, wife, and 3 children, living at 730 South 10th Street, are reported seriously ill with influenza. December 26, 1918, on page 2 in the commercial. Headline: Simmerings from Sandbourne. The influenza situation here has shown marked improvement during the past week, and the ban will probably be lifted the last of this week. The schools, which have been closed for 7 weeks, will begin December 30. December 27, 1918, schools will open Monday, in Vincennes, providing influenza continues to improve, is announcement made last night. The public schools of the city will reopen next Monday, providing the influenza situation continues to improve, was the announcement made last night by J.W. Foreman, City Superintendent of Schools. Mr. Foreman was notified the various teachers who are out of the city of the plans for opening the schools next week. The influenza situation was steadily improved for the past several days, and it is now believed that the epidemic has run its course. While a number of new cases are springing up in the country from day to day, in Vincennes the number of new cases has daily decreased. Physicians announced last night their belief that the local situation is showing permanent improvement, and unless new situations developed, it will be safe to remove the ban on schools by the first of the week. Captain N.E. Beckus, Secretary of the Board of Health, announced to the commercial last night that no new cases were reported by the quarantine officer, and stated that it is his opinion that the epidemic had run its course in the city, and if the situation remains the same or continues to improve, he would authorize the opening of the schools next Monday. Placing restrictions, however, on teachers and students which will safeguard the health of everyone. He stated that any new outbreak of the epidemic would result in the present plans being altered.